Salam sejahtera, selamat malam, salam Malaysia Madani, salam harapan saya ucapkan kepada semua penonton di luar sana yang bersama turut serta dalam perbincangan kita pada malam ini, yang kepada penonton yang taat setia, selamat pulang kembali kepada show kita yang sangat bermakna ini. Saya Howard Lee, Ahli Parlimen Ipoh Timur dan juga Ahli CEC DAP. Kembali bersama dan pada malam ini kita punya tetamu khas yang sangat istimewa, seorang yang dikenali, disegani dan disukai ramai, seorang cendekiawan dan juga seorang yang sangat berilmu dengan latar belakang pendidikannya yang begitu tinggi dan hebat. Seorang berkelulusan Malaysia yang mendapat sarjana muda dan juga masters dia kat UIA. Lepas tu kemudian perolehi PhD dia daripada Universiti Malaya. Saya sendiri pun tak ada orang Malaysia ni. Kemudiannya dia juga telah menjadi, kalau tak silapnya, chairman atau pengerusi kepada PCOM, Palestinian Cultural Organisation, sejak tahun 2012, dan sekarang dia telah menubuhkan satu badan pemikir dia sendiri yang bernama The Asian Middle East Center for Research and Dialogue. Nanti kita sembang secara lebih mendalam berkenaan perkara itu, dan dia merupakan seorang pakar dasar luar negara Malaysia. Ramai orang Malaysia pun tak layak gelar pakar dasar luar negara Malaysia. Jadi welcome, apa khabar Muslim, saudara dan Dr. Muslim Imran.
Baik, terima kasih YB Howard dan seluruh community yang sedang menonton show ni atas peluang ini. Saya sangat bahagia dapat berjumpa dengan YB dan dengan audience.
Hebat punya bahasa Melayu ni. Dan sebenarnya perbincangan kita pada malam ini adalah mungkin dia lari daripada nada dan tone yang biasanya lebih santai, lebih relax. Dan malam ini kita berbincang sesuatu yang agak serius, kerana terang-terang cakap orang tengah mati, orang tengah dibunuh secara besar-besaran di Gaza. Dan ia berkenaan dengan perang yang sedang berlaku di Gaza oleh rejim yang dilakukan ke atas rakyat orang Palestin di Gaza oleh rejim Zionis Israel. Dan tapi sebelum kita masuk ke dalam topik ni, kita kan akan tukar-tukar bahasa Inggeris, bahasa Melayu, walaupun Dr. Muslim punya bahasa Melayu hebat, tapi untuk kita mendapat kelancaran yang paling optimum, kita boleh tukar-tukar lah bahasa Melayu dengan bahasa Inggeris.
Kalau mau cuba bahasa Arab pun boleh.
Boleh, tapi saya tak berapa reti dia.
Bahasa Cina saya tak pandai sangat.
Okey.
Sedikit.
Nanti kita
Itian-tian.
Nanti kita saling belajar lah.
Boleh.
Mungkin Dr. Muslim boleh ceritakan sedikit cerita perjalanan saudara dari Palestin ke Malaysia sedikit sebanyak. Mungkin kita elaborate dari sana.
Okey, terima kasih Howard. Saya akan teruskan dalam bahasa Inggeris lah, lebih lancar.
Yeah.
I arrived in Malaysia some 20 years ago as a student, right after finishing my school program. And the journey itself is memorable. I cannot forget how I had to wake up in the very early morning, like 3 a.m. to take a bus that would be crossing the border with Jordan, because we don't have an airport of ourselves. Israel has bombed our airport in the early 2000s in Gaza. I am a Palestinian from the West Bank myself, and although I was born and grew up in the West Bank, and although the West Bank is only 30-40 kilometers away from Gaza, I've never been to Gaza from the West Bank. Later on in life, I had the opportunity to travel from Malaysia to Gaza through Egypt. The Palestinians are really scattered across different districts and regions because of the occupation. So when I traveled through Jordan, it took so many hours. We had to pass through so many checkpoints. There are hundreds of military checkpoints across the West Bank. And when you pass the border, Israel controls the border, so you have to go through Palestinian Authority first, Israeli authorities, and then eventually Jordanian. Then I flew to Malaysia. In Malaysia, I was lucky enough to have a scholarship during my earliest undergraduate studies. I did a Bachelor of Communications Engineering, a diploma in business administration as well in IIUM. And I'm thankful to Tansri Said Mukhtar Bukhari for being one of the lucky students who got that scholarship. I furthered my studies also in IIUM in this time in political sciences and foreign policy. Although I liked mathematics and somehow liked engineering, I never featured or wanted myself to end up becoming an engineer, practicing engineering. It's a lot of headache. And I am more of a people's person. I'd like to meet people and
you're a humanities
Sembang,
guy, yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah.
So yeah, I did my master's in political sciences. I wrote my thesis on foreign policy of Egypt and Syria, and eventually I was lucky to be enrolled in UM and completed the requirements for my PhD and defended my thesis last year. But I'm still waiting for the final.
Have you had your Viva yet?
I've had it, yeah.
Had your Viva?
I've had my
Cool,
Viva.
cool.
I'm now working on publications to complete the requirements of the university. And the focus of my thesis was Malaysia's foreign policy towards Palestine. So it's something that I have been witnessing as a student who lived in Malaysia and as someone who has been involved in the civil society activities for Palestine in Malaysia.
Right. And of course, you know, we've shared many stages together over the years, and I know your story, but maybe you can take this opportunity to explain a little bit about the think tank that you head now, the kind of work that you do, you know, what kind of stakeholders do you engage, what organizations you work with, what kind of output do you know, create. Just talk a little bit about your work.
The past 10 years or so, I was active in an NGO called PICOM, the Palestinian Cultural Organization. It's a civil society group based in Kuala Lumpur that tries to promote the Palestinian issue and to engage decision makers, civil society groups, the parliament. And this is probably how we got to know each other.
Yes.
Although I have heard about you before we met, good things. We used to reach out to parliamentarians, and one of, I would say, the success stories was seeing a Palestine caucus be established in Malaysian Parliament 4 or 5 years ago, and it still is very active under YB Said Ibrahim, Said Noor, and yourself and many other MPs.
We now have a regional caucus now.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, I appreciate that the Malaysian friends who are advocating the Palestinian issue are very proactive. They don't only do what can be done or what has to be done, but they go beyond that. They continue raising the bar, and this is something that we hope to see everywhere. So after this involvement in the civil society and after completing my PhD research, I decided that it's time to be more academic. And I worked with a few friends on setting up a think tank. About 3 years ago, several Palestinian and Malaysian friends, we worked on getting a new outfit that focuses on relations between Southeast Asia and the Middle East. More specifically, the political, economic, and security aspects of the bilateral and multilateral relations between these two regions. Why is that so? Because I feel that although a lot is happening in the real life, very little is being documented, very little is being discussed intellectually, very little is being done through informed analysis and research. And of course, we're talking, for instance, on the economic level about billions or tens of billions of dollars of exchanges happening, for instance, between GCC states, the Gulf Cooperation Council states, and the ASEAN states. A lot of, political relations, high-level visits, cultural exchanges. If you look into the Malay language, for instance, there are hundreds of Malay words that originated from Arabic. Kursi is one of them.
Yes.
There are, of course, many other cultures that have been exchanging,
even something as fundamental as hayat.
Hayat, dunya. So many, you'll be surprised. So many words. unlike, for instance, the Portuguese language, which has had an influence over the Malay, but it's mainly in spheres of religion, padri, for instance, gereja, or the sphere of kitchen. Because it's very clear that the Portuguese were here for spices.
Yeah.
So garfo is, Portuguese word. Almari, bandera. Okay, that's more towards politics. It was very interesting.
Sabun.
Sabun is Arabic.
Oh, is it sabun?
Yeah.
Because I think there's some
It's
European
a
language
common-
sabun.
Because many Arabic words also entered the European languages.
okay.
For instance,
Cool.
tomato, potato, and lemon are actually Arabic words that entered into the English language and many Latin languages. I was this very little knowledge of the Malay language was very helpful. For instance, during some travels when I was overseas, when I had, for instance, to exchange some discussions with some Portuguese-speaking friends from Brazil, for instance, and I didn't know much words that are Portuguese of Portuguese origin in the Malay language were very handy, like keju. I was looking for
Keju.
halal food, and keju was very helpful. So anyway, the think tank's goal is to try to have a more informed discussion between the two regions. And therefore, we organized a few conferences on the relations between the regions. We have had a few publications. We have a book very recently published by Gerak Budaya. And we're working on a few other initiatives. It's unfortunate that one of the founders of our think tank, a young Palestinian academic who was running the Palestine study circle. We have several study circles: China, Southeast Asia, Palestine, and soon Africa, and soon Central Asia study circle. One of the early members was Dr. Muhammad Jamil Zanin, who went back to Gaza in September after completing his PhD in USIM, and was killed the second day of this ongoing genocide in Gaza on the 8th of October. He and 22 of his family members were wiped out by an Israeli airstrike. His wife, who was also a postgraduate candidate in Malaysia, was killed in this strike, and almost everybody in his entire family. So that's, of course, one of the challenges, losing people. But the think tank is still in its early stage, and we're hopeful that we will work with other like-minded organizations. We have been reaching out to other think tanks, and we are, of course, active in reaching out to people in the government and in the political establishment, because many of the things that we have been discussing are actually to provide a better insight into international relations. And we live today in a very volatile international environment. I have a friend who is I would say a Russian intellectual who has been talking about World War III for more than 15 years. And I remember myself and many friends and colleagues laughing off and saying, you're just exaggerating. This is too much. World War III is far-fetched. But today, following the developments in Ukraine, where many people are talking about the use of nuclear arsenal, the Middle East, where Israeli ministers and members of parliament publicly called for the use of nuclear weapons. Something like World War III is unfortunately very, very relevant to the discussion. So we live in a very volatile world. Some people maybe in the audience would be saying, why should we be bothered about the situation in Palestine? It does not affect us directly. I would say that this kind of argument is used by many. But honestly, even if we put the ethical dimension aside, and we will come to that, even practically, no, it is affecting your daily life.
Absolutely.
Look at the international trade, for instance. With the ongoing genocide in Gaza, our Yemeni friends stepped in and blockaded Israel from the south. There is a real tension in the Red Sea and in the Arab Sea, and many of world's trade is going through those routes. So prices of basic needs are increasing and will increase further
due to logistics,
very simple
logistical
challenges. Companies that used to do shipment are now increasing the cost of
because
shipment.
they're having to divert,
And they have to
go
pay more to
around.
security companies and so many
Higher
other
insurance premiums. Yeah.
So this brings us to other issues to discuss, but I think, of course, everybody has to be prepared to face the realities of the current geopolitical developments. So this is amongst the few things that our think tank is trying to discuss, to find answers for, and to promote, because I would say that very little is being discussed the way it should be discussed.
Yeah.
When I did my PhD, for instance, about the role of NGOs in shaping Malaysia's foreign policy towards Palestine, I found out that there are at least 15 Palestine-oriented NGOs, 15 major humanitarian and civil society groups that are completely focused on Palestine, who have campaigns, rallies, meetings with officials, trips to Palestine, sometimes raise funds and have big projects in Palestine. But there were only, by the time I was writing, there were only 3 or 4 academic papers on the topic, not a single book at that time.
So there was discourse, but very little publications.
Yes, and the discourse is mainly an emotional discourse.
Rather than a geopolitical, substantive, action-based thing. Yeah.
People, sometimes when they think about an issue like Palestine, get very emotional, which is very natural. There is an ongoing genocide where tens of thousands of innocents are being butchered. Babies. Every morning we wake up, we check our Instagram reel. Well, for some of us, of course, we have to keep creating new Instagram accounts because they keep banning us. But yeah, when you check your social media accounts, you will see so many babies being butchered every day. This kind of development is, it's worthy of not only an emotional response and discussion, but also a rational and intellectual one in order to find solutions, in order to find practical measures.
You see, it is absolutely correct that you mentioned that it's increasingly become a less rational and more emotional response. But I think the war that is, with no notion of belittling what's happening in Gaza, because it is a genocide being waged by a terroristic organization called the Israeli Zionist state, if you want to call it state. I mean, we don't recognize it as that, but for all intents and purposes, they are terroristic and they are genocidal. Let's set that straight. But I think global warfare is becoming a global level warfare, and conflict is becoming closer and closer. I mean, you mentioned just now, of course, you've got what's happening in Ukraine and Russia. You've got what's happening in Gaza by the Israeli Zionist genocidal regime. You've got what's been continuously happening in Sahel, in the African continent, North Africa, etc., etc. And you've got these prospects of potentially what's happening between US and China escalating, whether it's on the Taiwan Straits or in the South China Sea. Global warfare seems closer than ever before. Now, if you were to zoom back into Gaza, of course, it sounds and it looks like more and more provocations, which brings me to Ismail Haniyeh, his death, his sacrifice. Do you read it as a potential provocation for what's happening right now to be escalated further in terms of it being a regional conflict? And if you can, give in your response, zoom further back into giving us an update in what's actually happening in Gaza right now. So regional, zoom in, global context.
Okay, that's, of course, it's a simple yet a sophisticated problem in Palestine. It's very simple because it's a straightforward case of colonialism. Israel started as a colonial power. It started by militias who, in a very clear tone, wanted to remove the original inhabitants and create a new settler colonial society, just like what happened in North America.
48.
Yeah, the history is there. Anybody can Google it. You can check it even on Wikipedia. Just like the European white colonial settlers wiped out the local inhabitants of North America, the Red Indians in this case, or their brethren did in Australia, and the Aborigines did not survive, this wave of settler colonialism. Israel thinks that they can do the same in Palestine. And Israel started this way in 1948, 1947, all the way to the end of 1949. Israel committed one of the most horrible genocidal campaigns in the 20th century. And it was very awful that it was carried out by people who suffered a genocide in Europe. Many of...
this is the hypocrisy of it.
Exactly.
It does not make sense. How can they base an entire formation of a state on the lie that it's a land without a man, for land without a people and a people without a land, when the land has been occupied by indigenous people for so long? How did they get away with that?
This is one of the bitter and sad realities of modernism, Modernity has created a very sophisticated war machine. And in the case of the West in general, they have been successful in using this war machine in many places. So we talk about the great, for instance, American Revolution, how they managed to create a successful state, but we forget about what happened to the Red Indians,
where they so-called liberated themselves from colonial powers and occupational powers to form their own state of freedom. And
so Israel is actually an extension of the West. This is why many Western powers are very hypocritical in their approach towards Israel-Palestine, because they identify with Israel. They, in their the backs of their minds, they think that these people are just like us. We managed to finish off the Red Indians. They are trying to finish off the Palestinians. We are civilized. They are civilized. We are democratic. They are democratic. And we managed to defeat the barbarians, in this case the Red Indians and others. They have to also have the opportunity to finish the barbarians. This is what they don't say on TV, of course, but
it's framed as
see it in their tone.
Yeah.
You see it in the simple conversations you have with Western diplomats. Of course, some are moving beyond this, racist tone, but it still is really strong and deep in the psyche of many in the West. Anyway,
they don't use the lexicon, but they use exactly the same
but
framing.
You can feel it, yeah. When they start to glorify a person like Churchill, Churchill was a racist who did not bother about a genocide in India or even in the Middle East, but he was a successful racist, a successful military and political leader. So he is being glorified. But a person like Hitler failed in his campaign, so he's not being glorified. Had Hitler won the Second World War, maybe he would be worshipped by the West, like Churchill is. Anyway, Israel has successfully wiped out 750,000 Palestinians in 1948, 1947, 1948. Many were sent into the exile, became refugees, and continue to be refugees until today in Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, and elsewhere. Those who were left inside Israel or inside Palestine became second-class citizens within the Israeli regime. Now, Israel had the opportunity of living in peace with its neighbors. It started as a colonial power, but many colonial powers eventually come to terms with their neighborhood. In the case of Israel, it was not, because Israel was championed by demagogues who believed in an extremist ideology called Zionism. Zionism belongs to the late 19th century. It is not very different from Nazism or fascism. The only difference is the content, but the direction, the tone, the extremism is the same. The true believers of Zionism were actually war criminals who managed to wipe out the Palestinian population in 1947 and 1948. Israel could have lived in peace with its neighbors, but its leaders chose to continue expanding their power. So in 1956 they attacked Egypt. 1967 they attacked Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. 1973 they clashed with Syria, Jordan, and Egypt. In 1982 they invaded Lebanon. 1987 they crushed the bone of the Palestinian protesters in the Intifada. In the early 2000s they clashed with the Lebanese in 2006. They invaded Gaza in 2008 and 9. 2012 attacked Gaza again. 2014 committed a mini genocide in Gaza, and now in this ongoing episode, they feel that this is time for the final solution. And this, if I may briefly highlight, this is probably because Israel is reading the geopolitical developments in the world.
Yes.
Israel realizes that the unilateral global order, where America was the most dominant hegemonic power and others were subservient, is declining.
The moment of unipolarity is no longer.
It's no longer. It's a multipolar system. So Israel feels that this is a very short period in which they should achieve a lot. A multipolar system will definitely not be in the favor of the Israelis. So they are trying to get rid of as many Palestinians as possible from Gaza and from the West Bank. They do that through bombing large numbers of Palestinians. I mean, come on, they have very sophisticated American weapons, state-of-the-art machinery. They could have killed they killed Haniya in a very accurate strike, killing only him and his bodyguards when there were many other people in the building. They killed
so they have the capacity,
have the technology
and accuracy to not kill civilians.
If they want to kill a single person in a room, they can with the technology they have, because it's an American technology.
So
but they choose to obliterate
all this rubbish about the fact that it's inevitable that you have a high casualty count of civilians. All that is rubbish, basically.
I believe that killing a large number of civilians is a goal by itself.
For them.
Yes, it's not. And some people say that this is a disproportionate response. Israel is killing too many people. No. Israel is killing too many people because this is a goal by itself. Netanyahu,
and mentioned by many of their ministers.
Yes, when they talk about nuking Gaza.
Yeah.
When a minister of heritage, I think, and a member of Knesset, another member of parliament, talk publicly about nuking Gaza. Then other smart Israeli commentators say, no, if you nuke Gaza, you will kill the 250 Israeli hostages, as if the life of 2 million Palestinians has no value. When they talk about nuking Gaza, they basically are talking about solving the problem of apartheid. Israel is an apartheid. Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and Israeli human rights group B'Tselem, and before that, the ESQA, United Nations agency in West Asia, have all published well-documented reports talking about Israel being an apartheid regime. Apartheid, in very simple terms, is a system where a small minority controls the majority and segregates based on either religion or race or ethnicity or etc. Israel is currently in that state of affairs.
And not to mention the countless UN resolutions.
And of course, the whole world is telling them that you cannot do that, but they keep doing it. So to solve the problem of apartheid, to continue to claim that they are a democracy, the solution for this is to reduce the number of Palestinians inside Israel and inside occupied Palestine. How to do that? They took the October 7 military operation as an excuse to start a mass killing campaign that continues to kill tens of thousands of Palestinians, and they're still not satisfied. Everybody was telling them, don't go into Rafah. No strategic gains in Rafah. They still insisted to go to Rafah. Everybody has been telling them, okay, you have basically killed 50,000 people. What else do you want? They don't have the next day, a scenario for the next day. You know why? Because the scenario of the next day is, getting rid of as many Palestinians as possible. I think they don't mind ending up with maybe a few 100,000 Palestinians living in Gaza to use us as cheap labor. They don't mind a few
and they've been doing that.
They've been doing that, of course, definitely. They don't mind a few 100,000 Palestinians living inside West Bank and Israel because, again, they still need cheap labor. They still need to claim to be a democracy. But they definitely want to get rid of as many Palestinians as possible. Who is helping them to achieve all of this?
Wow.
Unfortunately, the United States and Germany in second position are champions of this ongoing genocide. Some other Western powers were complicit in the beginning, like France, the UK, and others. But eventually, because of internal pressure, like you've seen the elections in France and in the UK, both punished the ruling party. And in part, maybe not necessarily the only issue was the Gaza issue, but in part because of the regime's complicity with what's happening in Gaza. In the case of the United States, it's very different. Why? Because the American democracy is not a proper democracy. The American democracy is completely bought by this small Israel lobby run by groups like the AMEC. Well-respected American political science professors like Professor John Mearsheimer have spoken about this for many years and have published books like the influence of the Israel lobby in the United States. They own congressmen and congresswomen.
Mearsheimer, Finkelstein, well-established body of thinking and works out there. So I think we all know it. But I think the fundamental question here now, amongst all of this negativity, all these kind of helplessness and hopelessness, there must be at least some degree of a framing of hope. Now,
Definitely.
assuming that there is hope, because
a lot
there
of
must
hope,
always
actually.
be hope.
A lot of hope.
There must be hope. How does one articulate that hope? Is there a chance of not just a ceasefire, but a permanent ceasefire? In fact, the whole notion of fire being taken away. Is there hope of peaceful coexistence? Is there hope of a Palestinian state that is equal? I mean, what's there for us, the world, and Palestinians, Gazans? What is there to hope for?
There's definitely hope if we look at the Palestinian struggle in a chronological order. If we look at the Palestinian issue 2 years ago, or even 1 year ago, and the Palestinian issue today.
And of course, I'd like you to mention maybe, the China brokered Hamas and Fatah
Yes, we should
meeting.
touch on that.
I think you must touch on that.
A year ago, or maybe 2 years ago, almost everybody felt that the Palestinian issue was being swept under the carpet. The Palestinian political existence was being wiped out. And we remember President Trump during his first presidency when he announced the Abrahamic Accords and the deal of the century. They used to call it the deal of the century. It was basically to finish off the Palestinian issue and to tell the whole world that, listen, these Palestinian troublemakers are only a small minority in Israel and Netanyahu is going to manage them. Maybe he will give them more jobs or, put a more, a strict security system or whatever. But in the last 10 months, we have seen the momentum of the Palestinian struggle inside Palestine and internationally growing like never before. Yes, we've lost many innocents. We have lost a lot of sacrifices, and it's very painful. I've lost so many friends. I'm not from Gaza. Had I been from Gaza, I'm sure I would have lost many family members. But even though I am not from Gaza, I have deleted like 15 numbers from my phone because I've lost so many friends who have been killed in this ongoing genocide. Imagine all the friends who are from Gaza. The Gazan population is heavily affected and traumatized with what's happening. But again, within Palestine, the realization that it's time to get our freedom is very, very clear. No two people argue about that. Palestinians feel that this is the time we're going to get our freedom. And no national liberation struggle can win without this kind of realization and commitment. Number two, the international solidarity movement is stronger than ever. We have never seen hundreds of thousands marching in Washington or in London in solidarity with Palestine, continuously interrupting the election campaigns of their presidential candidates, telling them that ceasefire now, Palestinian freedom from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. So there is a lot of growth in the momentum for a free Palestine. Therefore, there is hope. But how would that be manifested? This is, up to all the actors, current actors, mainly Israel. How Israel would like to end this matters, because Palestinians have no choice, no option. We are under occupation, subject to all kinds of tortures and policies. We have to fight back to survive. There is a brutal military occupation. So you will be naive to think that by wishing, it will end. It will end. You have to fight back. But Israel has choice. It has the military power. It has the political cover from the United States. It has the economic prowess because of the Western support. It can live in peace with us. Many have pushed Israel in the early 1990s for a two-state solution. We're telling them, give the Palestinians a part of their historical homeland. But it opted to say no. And in recent years, we have seen in few weeks, Israel has been discussing the Palestinian statehood, and they have had a vote in their parliament which resulted in an almost unanimous decision not to allow a Palestinian state. So the two-state solution was killed. Now, can there be hope for living in peace and coexistence? Definitely, because this comes back to the root cause. The Palestinians have never had an issue with the Jews. It was never a struggle about race or religion.
I think this is a key thing.
I think it's important in Malaysia because the issue is framed differently, unfortunately.
Yeah, I mean, it's often framed as is Muslims against Islam versus Judaism, is a Muslim and Arabs against the Jews. So I think if you can speak to that.
It's definitely not. I know it's framed like that, but that's totally wrong. The Palestinian people, the people of Palestine, are Muslim, Christian, and Jew. There are, of course, other minorities as well. Within the Muslim community, there are Druze communities. The Christians of all denominations exist in Palestine because, of course, Jesus was a Palestinian himself. And the enemies of the Palestinians are not one monolithic group. It's not that they are very cohesive. No, it's an ideology. The enemies are an ideological movement. The Zionist movement has attracted people from different ethnic backgrounds who all subscribe to Zionism. Of course, as long as they are Jewish followers of the Jewish faith. So the Palestinians have never seen themselves as Muslims only fighting Jews only. This is wrong. There are Christian Palestinian freedom fighters like the founders of one of our main liberation movements, the Popular Front, Dr. George Habash, for instance, who is a Christian and who has been who was one of the most significant Palestinian national liberation icons, Hanan Ashrawi, a Christian Palestinian. There was a member of the Palestinian parliament from the Palestinian Jewish community. But Israel has chosen to use religion, just like ISIS has chosen to use the Islamic faith to claim superiority. Now, if
is sick.
Of course.
Absolutely sickening. Yeah.
If some have been deceived by Israel's use of religion, especially from our brothers and sisters in the evangelical Christian community. Some have been deceived and thought that this Israel is the same Israel of the Bible, and the Israeli regime has been playing on this and using it for, of course, financial and political support.
Which
many Muslims
I'm not theological, but which has been proven by many and have widely published and publicized to be theologically and scripturally incorrect and inaccurate. Definitely.
I mean, it's good to follow some Palestinian evangelical and Christian, priests like Mundir Ishaq, for instance, who is very outspoken. He speaks in English as well. It's good to check his interviews. Anyway, the Muslim community in many places was deceived by ISIS ideology as well. So Israel is using religion, hijacking the Jewish faith to maintain a mini empire. Muslims should not fall into that trap. Muslims in Malaysia, for instance, I appreciate their support for Palestine. And I think, of course, it's driven mostly by their religious belief that Muslims should help those in need. Palestine is a holy land. Palestine should be free. But it doesn't mean that we should ignore non-Muslim support for Palestine or ignore non-Muslim Palestinians. And I appreciate the civil society groups in Malaysia who have been always wise. They have always helped Palestinian Muslims and Christians. In some cases, they even helped in renovating some Christian community centers and churches and so on. Because Israel's attack on the Palestinians doesn't see any color. They kill everything Palestinian. They have killed in the ongoing genocide in Gaza many Christians as well as the many Muslims. They have destroyed almost 200 mosques and 3 churches, including one of the most ancient churches in the world. So back to Malaysia, I think our Malaysian brothers and sisters who support Palestine should always look at the humanity side, should always look at the need to end occupation and colonialism, regardless of the faith of the freedom fighters in Palestine. But of course, having a religious obligation to help end injustice is always a plus point.
Now, in the framing of religion being misused, we've heard recently in the Malaysian political context, we're not going to say who, but certain terms have been bandied around, amongst which have created a lot of ruckus. Is a term called, supposedly Arabic, Kafir, harbi. I'm not going to load it. I'm not going to have it as a loaded question. Perhaps you can just elaborate a bit on your interpretation of this term.
It's an an ancient historical terminology used in some Islamic writings in the early Islamic dynasties, which clearly talk about not about citizens of the Islamic State or the Islamic Empire. It was talking about enemies of the state. For instance, in the case of the Muslim Empire in the early days fighting the Persian Empire, they would frame the Persian soldiers who were neither Muslims nor friendly as Kafir harbi, but it certainly does not apply to citizens of the Muslim Empire, be it Muslim, Christian, or in the old time Zoroastrian or follower of any other faith. I don't think borrowing from history, ancient historical labels and terms, and using it in a democratic framework is very constructive or helpful. I think it's better to build a more healthy democratic environment, while of course practicing your own ideology. In the case of Palestine, for instance, let me give an example. Hamas is a political Islam movement. They advocate political Islam, while at the same time prioritizing the national struggle. Like Popular Front is a Marxist movement, but they prioritize national liberation. There is a Communist Party that prioritizes national liberation. Within this context, I don't hear ancient terminologies being used within the Palestinian framework, maybe because we don't have the luxury to use this kind of name calling and labels against each other. We are in a survival mode. We are trying to liberate our homeland. Maybe in other societies there is this luxury, but honestly it's better to focus on what binds us together, what brings us together, how to cooperate, and of course disagree on many issues, but in a more constructive way than borrowing from history. Because just like Muslims can borrow from their ancient scriptures and historical books, others can do the same, which is not going to be healthy. Look at India. India is currently, exactly. India is a very toxic democracy. I love India as a civilization. I have many Indian friends, but look at Modi's India. It's being hijacked by Hindutva, an extremist version of Hinduism, where Muslims, Christians, and many other minorities are persecuted. That's not a good role model. I think Malaysia is still a leading Muslim democracy, well respected in the Muslim world. I know Malaysians would like to see their economy improve further, their government and their country play a more active role internationally, but I still compare it also with other OIC member states. Malaysia is doing very well. And many in the Middle East, and this is one of the things that we try to do in our think tank, many of the political communities and activists in the Middle East would like to learn from the Malaysian example, because you have managed to coexist for decades in spite of the religious, cultural, and ethnic backgrounds. In some Arab countries, where the population is sometimes 100% Muslim or 100% Arab, there have been very challenging, episodes in our contemporary and modern history where some states collapsed. There are many fragile states in the Arab world and the Middle East. Malaysia is successful in that sense, and I hope it continues to be successful. And I hope people continue to engage with each other constructively.
And of course, I think that the last question I'd like you to speak to is like, as you've mentioned just now, I mean, recently we've got the situation in Bangladesh, where you've seen literally religious minorities, Hindus, being literally massacred as a result of some of this kind of extremist interpretations of religion, forcing people into ideological corners that would motivate them to kill people. And that's just wrong. That's wrong on so many levels, which is why I asked you about the Kafir harbi situation, because this is probably where the seeds of it comes from. But with that, where you've got this extreme segregation, separation, and basically peoples being broken apart, I must draw you back to the question of the Chinese brokered Hamas and Fatah situation. Now that to me is a long-awaited unity amongst the Palestinian people, politically, for the nationalistic movement, and the agenda of a Palestinian state. Maybe you can speak a little bit to the notion of unity on the back of that historic coming together.
I think China's successful hosting of the Palestinian National Unity Dialogue was very important in many respects. Number one, it was a clear declaration that China is coming in. And that is very important for us because we have just discussed how the unilateral global order played in favor of Israel against the persecuted Palestinians. So seeing Russia come in or China come in or BRICS nations come in to try to adjust things in the international power play is very good development for the Palestinians. That's why no Palestinian faction said no when China invited them. Although there are differences, although there are disappointments, of course, in the part of almost every Palestinian faction at President Mahmoud Abbas for not running the elections in 2021 and so on. But everybody went to China because to them this was a declaration that China is putting its weight behind the Palestinian struggle. And
it's
look,
peace versus war.
Yeah, you look at the Chinese also are playing a really constructive role. They said, before we talk about Palestinian-Israeli conflict, we have to get the Palestinian home in order. We have to get the Palestinians work together. And the Palestinians and the Chinese have been friendly nations ever since the early days. So China hosted all the Palestinian leaders and expressed a strong commitment to Palestinian statehood and liberation. And of course, I'm very sure that it was not a good development for the Americans or any other Western powers who do not like to see a growing Chinese role in the Middle East. We have seen China
and global geopolitical order.
Yeah, of course, in Asia Pacific, China is there. They have no way but to deal with the Chinese presence. But in the Middle East, China is a newcomer when it comes to global politics. They were successful in mediating a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, a highly needed deal that America could never have done. They are now successful in bringing the Palestinians together. We don't know what's next. The second important message that this Chinese summit had was the public announcement of direct relations with Hamas. And that's important because many would like to cheer for Hamas in the international community, but talk only to Fatah. Many would like to feel pride of the Palestinian resistance, but eventually when they do diplomatic relations, they only reserve
with
it with the PA, Palestinian Authority. But in the case of Russia and now China, they are publicly telling the US and many Western countries who have been very hypocritical about their relations with the Palestinians. You know, these many Western powers, they meet Hamas, they send delegates and envoys to meet Hamas, but secretly, and they beg Hamas not to announce that. And back home, they go and list Hamas as a terrorist organization. Anyway, the Chinese were very clear that they not only want to support the Palestinians to unite, they would like to also work with Hamas in a constructive way to liberate Palestine. This is a very, very important development. And the Palestinians don't really have serious handicaps when it comes to national unity except external intervention from the Western alliance. The US in particular refused the results of the 2006 elections and continued to help Israel divide the Palestinians and continue to pressure the Palestinian Authority not to reconcile with the rest of the Palestinians. If the Chinese come in, Russia comes in, and other BRICS powers, probably countries like Malaysia and Indonesia as well come in, the Palestinians will be more confident to work together and fend off American pressure.
Now, since you finished on that note, my very last question, I hope for a two-sentence answer. November, Harris versus Trump. What do you think the outcome would be, and what do you think the outcome in this global situation vis-a-vis Gaza would be?
For the Palestinians, Trump is bad news, Harris is bad news. We have seen the worst. I don't think Trump has anything else to offer Israel. Biden-Harris administration has provided Israel the most sophisticated state-of-the-art weapons, funding of tens of billions of dollars. There are even reports of American boots on the ground, troops. They were building some piers in Gaza. What else can Trump offer Israel? except rhetoric. Trump is offering more rhetoric, but practically, the Biden administration has given Israel everything. That's why I don't have a vote in the US. But if I have a say, if I can encourage people, please vote something else. Jill Stein, Dr. Jill, or even a white paper is definitely better than a genocide enabler or a genocide cheerleader. Facilitator. You know, one of them is aiding genocide. The other one is saying, I'm going to aid it further. So, but for the world, I would say that both provide a challenge. You know why? Because the American empire is in decline. And declining empires are very dangerous. This has happened throughout history when a very powerful hegemonic power starts to decline and other power contenders start to rise. It tries to sabotage the whole setup. And this is what the US is currently doing in South China Sea and in the Asia Pacific. They are provoking the Chinese in Taiwan. They are provoking the Southeast Asian countries by building more military setup, by sending their warships. Look at the Middle East. Now, the Middle East was dominated by the Americans for many decades, since the 50s probably. The Soviet Union was providing some resistance here and there, but eventually since the Gulf War, the Americans have been dominating the Middle East. 40,000 soldiers are all over the region. Israel is their tool. Now, the axis of resistance is on the rise. They are denying America and Israel total hegemony over the region. So America is panicking more than Israel. They're sending warships after warships. They are bombing Yemen by themselves. They are willing to lose soldiers in Iraq and Syria and elsewhere to maintain their hegemonic power. Global declining powers are dangerous. And I hope Southeast Asian leaders in general who have been very successful in building up their nations in a fantastic miracle, actually. It's an economic miracle how many Asian nations managed to build up their economies within the span of few decades. They have to be very careful with not only Biden or Trump, the American establishment. They are up to no good.
The Thucydides trap is something that could trap both the top two and the rest of the world. So on that note, thank you very much for being with us today. On behalf of the DAP, I would like to thank you for spending this long hour talking about such a heavy topic, but has provided us and the audience a fantastic insight into what's going on in the world, in your region. Thank you so much. Begitulah perbincangan kita pada malam ini yang sangat bernas, sangat mendalam, berat juga, tapi rasanya sangat membina dan bermanfaat untuk semua. Sehingga sekali lagi kita berjumpa di masa hadapan. Saya ingin ucapkan terima kasih. Salam Malaysia Madani dan jumpa lagi sehingga kita bertemu sekali lagi.